We're going to go ahead and get started then. So I'm excited to introduce Dr. Wendy Charles. Dr. Charles obtained her PhD in clinical science with a specialty in health information technology from the University of Colorado Anschutz. She has 30 years of experience in health information technology, particularly in operations and regulatory compliance. And her appointments include a seat on the EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum Expert Panel, the HIMSS Blockchain Task Force, and other blockchain working groups. So we're pleased for her to be able to present blockchain applications in clinical research, hype versus reality. And if you could please hold your questions until Dr. Charles asks for them on her slides, we would really appreciate it. So, all right, take it away, Dr. Charles.
Oh, thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I'm so happy to speak at the university where I obtained my PhD. So thank you very much for having me. And I hope that today's session is very informative. I have been working with blockchain now for 6 years, and I work full-time in blockchain. So I am happy to share with you how this relates to some of the work that I do. And I am going to talk fast and furiously. So hang on. And again, please do hold some of your questions until I have slides that focus on those questions. So today we're going to talk about defining blockchain features, identifying applications of blockchain in healthcare and clinical research, describing blockchain myths and realities, and determining when a blockchain would be more appropriate than a database. So first of all, why should we even learn about blockchain in clinical research? Well, as we're seeing the evolution of the internet go into a Web3 construct. Now, Web3 is about changing from how the internet was first read-only to an interactive internet in Web2. And now as we move into Web3, we're seeing much more individual control, ownership, and interest in how data are being managed. And blockchain is the underlying technology for Web3. So when you hear about Web3 in the future, just be aware that that blockchain is powering it. It's just a component of Web3. Also, for those of us who've been involved in health information technology for a really long time, we know how technology has evolved. And when technologies were first introduced, there was a lot of caution. People said, you can't send health information via email, but we figured out how to do so securely. And then with each subsequent transition to newer technologies, such as sending over the internet, well, now we determined how to do that very with great security and encryption. And it's gotten to the point where people said, oh, you can't use a blockchain with health information. Well, now we're at the point where say, don't fall behind, because blockchain is everywhere. It's just not necessarily advertised in the way that you may realize. So going forward, I'm only going to provide a super brief introduction to blockchain since it's been around for a while. Most people are familiar with it. I want to offer some initial cautions, though, when I talk about blockchain, because most people have heard of blockchain, but the caution is that much of what you may have heard is wrong or updated. And so I'm going to provide a much broader perspective and with much more nuance than you may have heard before. As another consideration, blockchain is absolutely not for every purpose. It has very targeted benefits. And last, you'll hear about blockchain tools in the future. You may have heard about them in the media. When organizations design a blockchain, those developers are often unfamiliar with the healthcare and research regulations that have to be built into the technology itself. And for those of us in clinical research, we're very familiar with the FDA requirements of 21 CFR Part 11. So I am going to talk about that too. So, first caution, of course, blockchain is not cryptocurrency in itself. Cryptocurrency is built on a blockchain platform, and there are different types of cryptocurrencies. The most important thing is to be aware that blockchain is so much more than cryptocurrency. In fact, when we think about different cryptocurrencies, it's like concentric circles. So Bitcoin is one type of cryptocurrency, and cryptocurrency is one type of blockchain, and blockchains are one type of distributed ledger. And ultimately, these are all forms of databases and management. The most accurate way to think about blockchain actually is that it's not any one thing, that it's a set of tools and technologies that happen to have some common features. And so just like with the term database, if someone says to you, well, I created a database, you say, well, what kind? And the same really is true when it comes to blockchain. There is so much variation, so much variety. It is absolutely not any single thing. And when we talk about where healthcare and life sciences research fits in, it's really with the features of a distributed ledger technology. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the differences between distributed ledger technologies and blockchains. So first, the common features that these all have, and first and foremost, the data is stored on a ledger. For those of us who took accounting when it was still on paper, we learned about ledgers and how every single activity creates a new line. And it's a very different way of thinking about data management than those of us who are trained in classical clinical research models, where we had to design the databases to store data in tables and columns and rows. And it gives us so much more flexibility to be able to store activities on a ledger. For the next concept, blockchain uses cryptography. Cryptography is also not new. Cryptography is used in so many aspects of our daily life, especially whenever we are asked to sign something electronically or transmit information in an encrypted way. But the way that blockchain uses this is that for an input of any type, it can be raw text, it can be a small image, it can be a file, pretty much just about anything. It goes through a hash function that creates an alphanumeric output. And using this asymmetric encryption, this output is so sophisticated that you cannot reverse engineer to figure out what the input was. And this is the critical concept of how we form blocks, because as data are aggregated, there is a hash function that creates a single hash output of a block. And this is the component that makes hashes connect and how we get the concept of a chain. So for example, if we just look at block 2 here, all of the information, all of the activities from this block are combined together, and it includes the hash of the previous block to make a hash of block 2. And then when block 3 is formed, it's all the activities of block 3 plus the hash of block 2 in order to create a hash for block 3. So because each block contains the hash of the previous block, it's what connects the blocks and what makes it so tamper evident and tamper resistant. If you were to try to change any of the content in block 2, it would change the hash of that block. But because the hash of block 2 is also contained in the hash of block 3, it would change the hash of block 3 and so on and so on. So this is one of the key concepts of why people talk about blockchain as being secure. Now, as we think about how blockchains have evolved, of course, Bitcoin started in 2008 with that famous white paper by Satoshi Nakamoto, and then developed into Bitcoin in 2009, Ethereum in 2013. These are cryptocurrencies that were designed in order to address what people felt was a fault in banking. They were introduced at the time that banks were failing during the 2008 recession. And the goal was to create a system where individuals could share currency directly with each other without having an intermediary. So that's why they were designed to be public, so that anyone could see and transmit transactions, and that anyone could also join. Now, as blockchains have evolved, we've seen more and more features and more nuance. So previously they were all public and permissionless, and now we're seeing variations and combinations of how blockchains can be formed with levels of visibility and control. While health information tends to be private and permissioned, we're also seeing evolution into private applications that can be on top of public blockchains. And so it's just important to know the takeaway is that there's lots of variety about how these can be designed and formed in order to achieve specific purposes. So the next and last critical concept of all of the similarities is that storage is distributed. There's no single point of failure, that those ledgers are distributed among many servers. And the servers are called nodes in blockchain parlance, where they all can communicate with each other. Again, so there's no single point of failure. So this term distributed is key to that definition that we were talking about earlier of a distributed ledger technology. And so these are some of the fundamentals that underlie that. And as these storage mechanisms and as these blockchains have continued to evolve, there's more and more ways that they can be used for clinical research, for example. Some companies believe that the most ethical approach, I don't know, is to have it all private as a private blockchain where a single organization may support the blockchain so that it can also meet some of its regulatory requirements for managing access controls and security. But there's also a number of different options. So another strategy is called a consortium blockchain, where each organization maintains its own storage, but then communicates with other organizations, and the activities are recorded on the ledger. Or there's also hybrid solutions where there could be a private blockchain that anchors to a public blockchain and offers just more features. So there's a wide variety of how these can be designed depending on the purpose. With clinical research thus far, we've seen largely models that involve a commercial sponsor taking control in order to maintain their requirements, in particular for Part 11, and all of the access controls and the data integrity controls and being able to manage the data from end to end. But there are also decentralized models as well, where the ownership and control can be distributed. Now, it's important to know that this concept of decentralized does not mean anarchy. It doesn't mean that nobody is in control. In fact, there isn't a completely 100% decentralized blockchain out there. Even the Bitcoin and Ethereum networks have hierarchies of individuals who can make decisions. So it's just important to know that governance can be designed depending on the strategies that would best meet the specific needs of an organization. So in going into different aspects, this just kind of summarizes that, for what people are often familiar with public blockchains, that anyone can send, approve, or read the activities, and that for these other designs, there can be fewer individuals or different layers of governance. Now, some people say, are these really blockchains? If they're consortium or hybrid, are they really decentralized? If there is more access and control? But what I have seen by serving on a number of international committees, such as IEEE, and with interactions with the ISO, the International Organization of Standardization, is that there are now tens of thousands of organizations developing blockchains that have more private features or more centralization, and they're still calling them blockchains. So we're seeing market-driven forces really change the way that we think about how blockchains are designed and advertised. So the last example of just blockchain basics is that if we were to think about how this actually looks and works with other software, that in its simplest view, this is a very simple view. Typically, there's several layers of software, but we can have a blockchain and the smart contracts that connect via application programming interface, which is the common way that programs are connected today. And that you could still use the same applications that you use and love and you're familiar with, but then a blockchain could perform additional functions. And I'm going to talk about those functions in more detail in just a minute. So talking specifically about some of the features, common features to blockchains include all of the following on this chart, but blockchains can be designed for different purposes in order to achieve specific needs. And some of the critical components are being able to automate some features and create more trust and transparency. And smart contracts. I don't know if you've heard of the concept of smart contracts. Smart contracts are not contracts and they are not necessarily smart. But this is a layer of software that can be added to a blockchain in order to, as a code. It's a code-based agreement where it can execute automatically when certain conditions are met. These are the features that are often advertised, and with Ethereum, for example, that it can execute automatically certain data flows, certain activities, especially when we're looking at access controls. So automation, the goal is to reduce human involvement to make a process more efficient. My caution, which I will talk about later, is that with any computer code, there can be bugs in smart contract code. We're also seeing as a feature of blockchain is the ability to create more highly contextualized, and we also call it smart data. That since we're storing data on a ledger, we have more capability of how we manage information about a data object. In fact, some organizations are creating blockchain-based data objects that also capture ownership, which can be legal ownership, but most often it's more about control and which individual or organization has the authority to share information or change information. And we can add a lot more attributes, metadata, and relationships to really understand and get more out of the data that we manage. What I love about this particular feature is that it enables provenance for clinical research. Talk more about that in a minute. An activity that's very dear to my heart is called dynamic consent. And this is an activity enabled by blockchain, enabled by some of those smart contracts, where an individual can give permission, but menu-based permissions or checkbox-based permissions, where they can agree to participate in a repository, but only agree to certain conditions. Now, we can do forms of dynamic consent without blockchain, but it's highly manual. And the goal of adding blockchain to the process is that it automates the access permissions on the way down and enables the process to be much more efficient and much more patient-centered. And so when we think about how blockchain is used in practical uses, that for some of the activities that I have been involved with, we've been using it for individuals having more say and sharing capability of their health information, or being able to agree to being in particular studies, or even how they will allow their data to be used for future research. So it allows a much more efficiency in a process that's much more patient-centered. And this is a screen from an actual product I worked on, where it is checkboxes, where you can see how an individual was presented with different choices, and then the person's choices can be reflected and automated down. For some other features I love about how we utilize blockchain differently is integration of data silos and all of those different data sources that we have that don't otherwise talk to each other, and how to map them and create schema for data sharing much more effectively and efficiently, including connecting systems that don't always talk to each other. This is particularly pertinent in a clinical research study where we may use 10 to 15 different systems. And typically, historically, there's a layer of middleware that has to connect all of these systems. And it can be messy and it's complicated. And one of the challenges too, when trying to connect systems, is maintaining provenance of the data through the flow of the data lifecycle. And by using the blockchain-based schema, we can allow for a much more efficient and effective data flow and really track it along the way. Okay, so I'm going to stop right here, and I'm asking you to, if you have questions on what I covered so far, be aware I'm going to cover a lot of additional material going forward. Any questions? Okay, I am going to continue because we will continue on this frenzied pace. All right, so this is the part that I enjoy, and I hope that you will follow along closely with me. The goal of this presentation was to provide broad perspectives about blockchain and be able to explore more of the nuance. There has been a lot of hype about blockchain, and unfortunately to its detriment in many ways, because most people are fearful that blockchain would not live up to the reality of what people are saying. So I and other people are naysayers who claim that blockchain can't do certain things that it can. So my hope is for every statement that I'm going to offer you, that you mentally try to identify, do you think this is a myth? Is it hype, or is it closer to the reality of the situation? So the statement for this one, blockchain is very early for its use in healthcare. Myth, hype, or reality? Okay, the answer to this one is a bit mixed. The reality is reflected in some of the statistics that we have, but it's hard to know if all of these statistics are current because not a lot of surveys have been done during COVID. As of 2018, from an IBM survey, 49%, so this is 2018, 49% of global healthcare companies indicated that they were developing blockchain solutions. And as of 2020, 70% of life sciences executives stated that they plan to use and implement one or more blockchain projects. So where this is relevant is, okay, in 2017, I went to a conference. It was an mHealth conference for pharmaceutical executives. I wasn't a pharmaceutical executive, but I went there anyway. And during the presentations, every single speaker, 2017, said, we are working on blockchain, and if you people aren't learning about blockchain, you're going to fall behind. And the sentiment of the conference was that blockchain really is important to start integrating, that it's not so revolutionary. It is just kind of the fact of how we are integrating software today. And so I don't know whether COVID affected the actual implementations. I do know from my own personal experiences that as of 2018, all 20 of the top 20 pharmaceutical companies had one or more blockchain projects in progress, and that more and more have innovation centers that are exploring the use of blockchain. The best analogy for this is like a tree. Think about a tree. It has a canopy and it has a root structure. The root structure is often as big as the canopy, but you can't see it. And I believe that there is almost as much blockchain development that you can't see as there is that you can. And so as more and more organizations become comfortable with blockchain, I really do think that we're going to see a lot more of it. Okay, so for healthcare, some of these are statistics from Forbes, from big research organizations. They were published last year, 2022. So blockchain in healthcare is predicted to grow 68.3% in compound annual growth rate from 2022 to 2030. And that blockchains in healthcare would be worth 121 billion by 2030. That 55% of apps would include blockchain by 2025, as predicted by Forbes, and would save healthcare 100 billion annually by 2025. These are very rosy. I don't know if they are completely accurate, but I think it's important to note that reputable organizations such as Forbes are making this prediction, and that it does indicate that there is some information behind it. So as we think about blockchain healthcare progress, I'm showing you a graphic that does involve fictional data. Okay, so this isn't real, but it helps tell my story. That many blockchain projects are in early stages of development, and they will continue to progress over the next 10 years into greater levels of maturity. But it's also important to know that some blockchain companies and products are mature now, and they have been for some time. So for example, for my full-time employer, we've had a blockchain in full production for enterprise level healthcare since 2017. So there are organizations that are thought leaders in setting best practices and can really help us understand and grow this technology. So some people might say, well, I don't know, that all sounds interesting, but I don't think I interact with the blockchain. Actually, you do. You interact with a blockchain every single time you step into Walmart. You interact with multiple blockchains. And these were formed by Walmart in a partnership with IBM starting in 2016 already, because Walmart was so concerned about how much it cost for all the food recalls. And if you're like me, you remember how many times lettuce has been recalled, and then you go to a restaurant and then there's no lettuce, and you go to the grocery store and there's no lettuce. It's because there's a recall. And the big challenge is when lettuce is picked on a farm, it's all mixed up on the truck, and it goes to the distribution warehouse where it's all mixed up again, and then it gets mixed up on trucks again, and then it goes to Walmart store, and then nobody has any idea exactly where the produce came from. And on average, it takes a public health official 6 days to be able to trace the source of contamination to any particular farm. Walmart had said, this is costing us too much money. There has to be a better solution. Well, there's a blockchain. And so together with IBM, they created IBM Food Trust. And IBM, together with Walmart, let me back up, Walmart offers this technology at no charge to all of its farmers, all of its truckers, all of the individuals in the supply chain, and for free. And they are simply required to use it or be dropped as a supplier from Walmart. And Walmart implemented this in 2019, September 2019, for its produce for lettuce. And now the produce manager can just pull out a smartphone and scan a barcode or QR code in order to learn exactly what farm that box of produce came from and what day it was picked and who shipped it, in order to have much more traceability and safety in the food supply. Okay, so now the next one. Statement: blockchain should be used in life sciences research due to its immutability. Is that myth, hyper, reality? Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in this one, and the answer is actually mixed. So the first question we have to ask is about immutability. Is immutability absolute? So absolute means, is it carved in stone? Is it going to survive the next zombie apocalypse? The answer to that is it depends on how we define immutability. And this is a really important way of thinking about it. So in 2018, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology put out a guidance saying, please stop saying that blockchain is immutable, because it's not. And they wrote that most publications on blockchain technology describe blockchain ledgers as being immutable. However, this is not strictly true. They are tamper evident and tamper resistant. And this guidance document goes through all of the circumstances for which blockchains could be vulnerable, at least in theory. And why this means so much to me: I started presenting about blockchain in clinical research in 2019. And the first time I presented, I said, oh, you got to use blockchain for clinical research because it's immutable. I was heckled. No lie. I was heckled. It really threw me off. And some software experts had said, Wendy, you don't know what you're talking about. It's not immutable. And here's why. And that enough people in the audience were knowledgeable and they were making fun of me. So I went to a blockchain meetup the following week, and I said, you gotta tell me, is blockchain, I asked a question in the audience, is blockchain immutable? And they all started laughing and they said, no. And so I was humiliated again. And so now I understand the nuances, and I'm trying to impart this knowledge so that we can all speak in an informed basis about immutability. So the best way to think about immutability is that blockchains for healthcare and life sciences are designed with extra security features for tamper resistance and tamper evidence. And when we think about how long do we actually need to store the ledger? Well, we don't want to store it forever. We want to have better methods of managing the ledger as part of our technology life cycle. And so we have designed mechanisms in order to create a blockchain mechanism that works better for the risk factors that we face, also for having use a technology, a cloud-based technology with potential sensitive information. So how are our clinical research organizations using blockchain? These are just a few examples. I've been involved in many projects that involve most of these. And it's just valuable to know that it starts from exchange all the way to patient engagement in order to really increase capabilities of often existing systems, sometimes it offers a unique capability unto itself. And as an example of some clinical research organizations really paving the way and showing us how powerful this technology is, the Mayo Clinic had partnered with Trial, a Dutch software technology company, in order to leverage blockchain for their clinical trial designs. And we have to know that since the Mayo Clinic is such an established research organization, if they trust this technology, it's worthwhile for us to consider that it can meet clinical trial capabilities as well. So next, another research organization, another consortium pursuing blockchain is the MELODY project. And MELODY stands for Machine Learning Ledger Orchestration and Drug Discovery. And it's a consortium of 10 pharmaceutical companies and 7 academic organizations in Europe that use blockchain to share an artificial intelligence algorithm. And each company trains it on its own intellectual property, its own data, to inform and improve an algorithm, and then they share the algorithm, and then another organization will use it to inform their data. And the hope is that through this collaborative process that they can improve the drug discovery process while still protecting their intellectual property. Okay, next statement. So the US government would never allow use of blockchain. Is this myth, hype, or reality? What do you think? Well, I'm happy to report this is totally a myth and it's totally wrong. Actually, did you know that in the United States, we have a blockchain congressional caucus? We have congressmen devoted and serve on a blockchain committee to advance blockchain initiatives in the United States. In fact, in 2020, they advocated to then President Trump, please use blockchain for helping us manage the COVID pandemic. And I've gotten to meet their congressional staffers, and there's a tremendous amount of interest about how to allow the US to become more competitive by using emerging technologies such as blockchain. In fact, you may recall there was a big controversy when the data reporting was transitioned from being reported, the COVID cases were reported from the CDC to transition to the Department of Health and Human Services. And people said, oh, it's all political. What they didn't know is that the reporting for COVID cases was transitioned to the Department of Health and Human Services so that the COVID cases could be tracked on a blockchain. And so this was a very powerful government initiative, and it was very effective because they could go back and determine whether cases had been accidentally reported twice or whether an organization reported in a big block, as we finally had the mechanism to be able to see the audit trail of those activities. And the NIH has been involved in blockchain, and this is a project that I was involved in. So with the NIH National Center for Advancing Translational Science, they were very interested in using blockchain for managing molecular compounds that would be used in synthesis for drug development. And so this was a project where I got to help and I got to work with the NIH about how best to manage their technology on blockchain. And I got to work closely with their scientists about meeting their scientific objectives. And so they could develop very granular sharing of their molecular compounds with other organizations, and then still be able to see and manage the intellectual property. So the NIH itself had moved on this activity, and I think we're going to see a lot more development. Okay, so next statement. Blockchain is incompatible with FDA regulations. What do you think? Is this myth, hype, or reality? Okay, so the answer to this is it is myth. It is totally not true. And this does stem from the fact that many organizations were uncertain about how to move forward. Anytime there's a new technology, people just don't know whether a regulatory agency will be receptive to it or not. And in this 2018 PricewaterhouseCoopers survey, the majority of organizations were the highest response of fear was regulatory uncertainty. And it's not unexpected either when you think about how it often takes a while for exposure of a new technology before organizations really become comfortable in how best to manage it. And anytime there's innovators and early adopters, they pave the way while others watch and others wait to see what has happened and how can we become compliant with best practices. But it's important to know that the regulations are technology agnostic and that they don't specify the use for any unique technology except for maybe the category of AI. And so in my direct conversations with the FDA, they had already seen some blockchain-based systems being used for submission for new drug applications. And when I got to present with Dr. Chrissy Cochran a few times in conferences, then I learned about how receptive the FDA is to new technologies. And I had the opportunity to also provide information sessions to the global consumer safety officers, which are the auditors in the FDA, and help them understand how blockchain fits into their existing regulatory structure. So it's really, while there are some different features of blockchain than we are used to for some traditional database systems, it really does still fit nicely. It fits so nicely, in fact, that the FDA is part of initiatives itself. So the FDA has participated in 2 major national pilots of blockchain-based systems for Drug Supply Chain Security Act. And in fact, in this 9-page FDA Technology Modernization Action Plan, this plan mentions blockchain 4 times as being a critical technology for moving emerging data management forward. And it was a tiny piece in the Informed initiative. I'm not sure if that went forward, but the initial goal was to utilize blockchain in order to better mobilize the data submitted for a new drug application so that it could be shared and used more broadly in a protected way. Okay, next statement. Blockchain is too public to be used by healthcare organizations. Oh, I hear that one a lot. So do you think that's myth, hype, or reality? What do you think? Okay, so this one is a myth too. And it depends entirely on how it's designed. So it's valuable to know that in the country of Estonia, they utilized a blockchain on top of their national electronic health record system since 2016. So, and they utilize blockchain for their national EHR to allow patients to have more visibility and control over who can access their health information. The following is a project that I got to be part of, although I wasn't part of the initial part. It's more like a team member at the end, where Empiric Health was a spinoff of Intermountain Healthcare that later got acquired by Olive. And Intermountain Healthcare was very interested in how can they utilize emerging technologies for improving patient outcomes and reducing surgical variations. And so for this whole network of hospitals, 24 hospitals, 160 plus clinics, they really were invested in how do they use emerging technologies. And as a result of implementing a blockchain for their surgical reviews, they were able to save $90 million over 4 years. And this involves real patient information from the electronic health record systems and connecting, I never remember the right number. It's like 8 to 12 different systems that would never otherwise talk to each other, and made it so much more efficient that Intermountain Healthcare could narrow down its focus on what to target for better efficiency and better health outcomes. It's another project that I worked on. This is a technology designed to manage immune responses for people who are worried about whether the COVID vaccine worked, and individuals' test results are managed with the blockchain, and that individuals have much more control over how they share their information. So it's absolutely being used in healthcare. It just depends on how the system is designed and how the organization is able to chooses to manage the privacy. Okay, next statement. NFTs are the hottest new thing. Myth, hype, or reality? What do you think? Okay, so it's my opinion that this is hype. So for those of you not familiar with a non-fungible token, is it a form of asset? Now, it might be helpful for me to explain what a fungible token is so that a non-fungible token makes more sense. So a fungible token is like a dollar. You could divide a dollar into 4 quarters, and every quarter has the same value, and you can divide it up as much as you like, where each of the divisions has the same value, means exactly the same thing. Same is true with cryptocurrency. If you divided a Bitcoin in half and people each had half a Bitcoin, they have exactly the same thing. You can do that. A non-fungible token is an asset that can't really be divided or replaced. So a good example is a piece of art. You can't like divide a piece of art in half and then say, okay, each of you has half, but it's not the same thing. So we heard a lot about digital assets and NFTs with the Bored Ape NFT images, with LeBron James video where people were paying millions of dollars. That definitely was hype. And how a blockchain is used for managing NFTs. So what we are seeing is a lot of interest going down now about NFTs and what is the best way to think about them as an asset. And I thought it was interesting in the last week, a bag company, Hermes, put forth, won a lawsuit against an NFT producer who had made an NFT of one of their bags. And the NFT provider had to pay a huge fine and pay damages to the manufacturing company. So we are seeing it scaled back some ways. Where I think NFTs are going to be really interesting for clinical research, though, is from an initiative being put forth by the OECD. And the OECD is partnering with a company called Ocean Protocol in order to ascribe NFTs to data sets. And a data set then could potentially be viewed as an asset. We know that our data have value to a company, and we know that our data sets are special. And so then being ascribed an NFT is a really interesting and creative way of managing the data as an asset. Okay, next statement. Use of blockchain greatly increases security. Is this myth, hype, reality? Okay, so the answer to this one, in my opinion anyway, is mixed. And because blockchain is software, not magic, it's designed by humans, programmed by humans, administered by humans, and operated by humans. And so it can show some human fallibility. In fact, when we look at smart contracts, the major risks to blockchain cryptocurrency has been from smart contracts that weren't designed as securely as they should have been. No one has produced a final number for how much cryptocurrency has been stolen. I did my very best to aggregate the numbers from reports I've seen, but these are the only reported outcomes, that at least 17 billion has been stolen from poorly designed smart contracts. And when we think about blockchain itself, blockchain can introduce some of its own risks. Now, for those of you familiar with information technology, you'll see that some of these risks are inherent with any cloud-based system. But it can, at least in theory, introduce some risks about how the technology can operate. A better way of thinking about security is not, is it blockchain or not, is more about how is this technology designed. And while blockchain technologies are very secure, security is much more a function of current good manufacturing processes and solid procedural controls. And there can be a very strong electronic research system and a really secure research database and a really poorly designed blockchain. The most important thing is that it's great software development with tremendous amount of verification and validation, which are required by regulation. Okay, so I am nearing the end of the myths. So this is the last myth, hype, or reality we will discuss. What do you think for this statement? Blockchain enhances data quality. Is this myth, hype, or reality? Okay, before I give my opinion, I'm gonna make sure that we understand what I'm talking about with data quality. There's a difference between data quality and data integrity. Of course, we know that blockchain can enhance data integrity because it adds audit trails to some systems and some data flows that don't otherwise have it. But how about the quality itself? Well, this I believe to be hype. And part of the factor is that quality is more of a function of the data origination and the people interacting with it than it is of the technology that manages it. And one issue that comes up is we call it the zero state problem, and that if source data are inaccurate, we know that from conducting clinical research. How many queries have we had to fix? How many times have we had to sit down with research participants going over their diary? And we know that some data isn't accurate. Lord knows how inaccurate the health information records are. So then we have to ask, well, have we achieved trusted data by putting inaccurate data on a blockchain? Did that really solve our problems? So it's better to think about this in terms of what can we do and where is the strength and where are the weaknesses. So a first issue we can target is often called the first mile problem, and that's all of the activities that take place before the data get entered into any system. And a blockchain, nor really any technology, can improve patient compliance or adherence. I mean, prompts help, but we ultimately can't use technology to know whether a person's birth date was entered one day off. And we can't necessarily use the technology to prevent misunderstandings or simple forgetfulness and misconduct or fraud. If someone's intent on misconduct, then it's difficult to prevent that before the data get done on the added to the technology. We also have the same problem when it comes to the last mile problem, and that's what happens to the data after it's exported from any system that's being used. A blockchain can't prevent inaccurate statistical analyses or self-serving data interpretations or reports that focus on something that the data may not represent. Some people have said, oh, well, we should just post all research data publicly. And there are some websites for research organizations to do that. But we can't post identifiable health information or data that would constitute PHI because they are confidential. We tell our research participants we're going to protect your data, and we tell them what limitations we have and what data could be released. So unfortunately, or fortunately, when we think about, well, what data could we make more available? We often need that PHI in order to really understand demographic differences or changes across time. And that's the type of data that can't be released. So I don't know that there's a solution to that, but it will always be an issue about what is the human behavior before or after you add data to any technology. So next, when would you use blockchain in clinical trials? There's lots of different circumstances where it can add value, but some big parts really do involve collaboration. And that's when we have to partner with other research organizations that we may or may not trust. It also comes about when we have to show a source of truth for the data that we rely on in order to make decisions for drug safety or for device development, or how we report information that we get from a clinical trial. All of these require an inherent solution to manage. Now, for those of us who have been using Part 11 systems since 1997, when the Part 11 first came out, we know that much of this is already included in some of those, in some of the EDC systems, the CTMS systems. However, what blockchain does in this case is when it links those systems, that it can continue the provenance throughout those systems. And a good way to start by asking is, what is the value proposition that an organization is trying to achieve? Blockchain isn't for everything. So if we can identify, well, what are the key dimensions that an organization is trying to achieve, we can determine whether blockchain offers capabilities that could help. and addresses very specific value drivers that we can build into our return on investment and some of our specific metrics and measurables. Some organizations start out with lower risk projects and get more comfortable until they pursue some of the higher risk projects. It is valuable to know that blockchain absolutely has moved into managing some sensitive PHI, and it is making a difference. It has evolved at the level of people's comfort. So I'm actually going to continue with my takeaways and then open it up for questions. So we know that all emerging technologies follow a hype cycle, and this is a Gartner hype cycle that includes a lot of the blockchain components. And you can see that according to Gartner last year, that Web3 based technologies, remember that blockchain is an underlying component of Web3, is potentially reaching the peak, and that we're going to see some disappointment for a while until organizations become really comfortable. So we know that any new technology has to be utilized and people have to learn best practices before it can reach maximal effectiveness. But I hope that what you take away from this presentation is that blockchain isn't just a cool technology. It can be a health information technology, and it can be a research technology. And I also hope that you remember that blockchain is software, not magic, and it has its strengths and limitations. If you're interested in what I talked about today, please do learn more by picking out my book. You can buy it at these booksellers, but you can also get it at no charge by logging into the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus Library and being able to access it there by looking it up and downloading it for free. So I am now eager to find out your questions. And if you have additional burning questions that you don't have time for or that you're not comfortable sharing publicly, please do reach out to me. And I would be happy to talk to you about how I can best explain some of these concepts in more detail. All right, well, thank you. Any questions?
It looks like Nicole has a question.
Awesome, okay.
Hi, can you hear me at all?
Yes, I can.
Oh, perfect. Hi. So yeah, my name's Nicole. I just actually started here as a research nurse through the university. And so one of the things that I thought about during your presentation was, and maybe this is a myth, and I apologize, this is new information for me, this concept of blockchain. What's the concern about like people's data being sold? Because I know other like social media companies and like other companies are selling data. So how does this relate to research studies and like kind of like the conversation around the blockchain?
Oh, I love this question. I actually, within the last year, wrote a journal article and a book chapter on data marketplaces and sales. And even just yesterday, I read a fascinating article about evolution of data sales and how mental health information is now being sold. Very sensitive. So I'm going to unpack this just a little bit. So our health information has been sold since 1999. And Cerner was one of the first EHRs to start selling in de-identified form the information stored in their EHRs, and then Epic, and then I'm sure that they all do. And I am aware of at least 60 different data sales organizations and data marketplaces that sell health information. So in the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a movement toward creating blockchain-based data marketplaces so that if we recognize that data are being sold, can we empower individual patients to have more visibility and control over their information? Definitely research organizations are looking at how they can add additional blockchain technologies to their research repositories so that, as I talked about with dynamic consent, so that individuals can have more visibility and control of how their data and specimens are used, and that they could potentially even receive some remuneration if they're used. So blockchain isn't necessarily the solution to a very large scale issue and the importance of making data available as real world data that can also transition into real world evidence. But blockchain can be a part of the solution in order to create more patient-centered focuses and to create better tracking so that we can better honor our commitments to the research participants who are volunteering to participate.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for your question. Okay, any other questions? Okay, I wanted to emphasize too how much I appreciated you inviting me for this presentation. I shared my opinions. I hope that my answers made sense and why I offered the opinion that I do. I have a lot of experience, but I don't know all of the answers. So I just wanted to make sure that you just walked away without a single definitive answer, but the ability to ask more nuanced questions and the ability to see a broader scope and a broader view of some of these difficult questions and issues that we face.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And there are lots of thank yous in the chat for you as
Great.
well.
Thank you.
So, all right. And thanks for everyone
Thank
for
you, Dr.
attending.
Charles.
Okay. Thank you all.